There we go. We call that the Cowtown Marathon Blues. That's a good one, yeah. We're going to kick the service off now this morning. Welcome to 1111 at the Garden. We've got a super Tracy Chapman song for you now. Here we go.
There is fiction in the space between the lines on your page of memories. Write it down, but it doesn't mean you're not just telling stories. Fiction in the space between you and reality. You would do anything to make your everyday life seem less mundane. There is fiction in the space between there's a science fiction in the space between you and me. Fabrication of a grand scheme where I am the scary monster. I eat the city as I leave the scene. In my spaceship I am a laughing remembrance of that dream. No one but you standing. Leave the pity and the blame for the ones who do not speak. Write the words to give respect and compassion, and for posterity. Write the words and make believe there is truth in the space between. Space between you and everybody. Give us what we need. Give us one more sad sort of story. In the fiction, the space between. Sometimes a lie is the best thing. Sometimes a lie is the best thing. The best thing is the best thing.
Strong work. Yep.
Good morning. That was a strong start. Yes. As I lead us in the welcome candle this morning, I want to call y'all's attention, if you haven't noticed it, to the little graphic at the top left where there's kind of odd what's going on there. That's a depiction of the Navajo storyteller. And this is something that I just wanted to say a word about because I'm very interested in Native Native peoples and their origins and what they have to share with us. And they do. Just a wonderful reminder of how we are all at the table and we're all included in this. The Navajo storyteller, they refer to themselves as Dine, which is the people. And the people tell their stories through the storyteller who talks of the origin of woman and man and universe and all creation and reminds us. And I love to see depictions of them because there's always kids crawling all over them. And that's how we are with story. We need to tell it, we need to share it. And I think that's so appropriate for our series right now. So as we consider our origins and our stories that connect us and keep us together and lead us toward the future, let's say our welcome candle. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, does not matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again.
Thank you, Sharon. 11:11, it's time to stand and sing your butts off. Are you ready? We'll accept nothing less. Last week I forgot to welcome Kevin Grove back. He had been gone for 2 weeks on a cruise in the Gulf of Kevin Grove, so thank you for coming back. Justin Pate was gone for a week doing a teacher thing, so welcome back to Justin Pate. Our dear friend Lydia, who normally sings with us, is on vacation in D.C., and in her place is Sarah Caldwell, rocking the harmonies. So that's all I have for you now. Let's sing a little bit, all right. Right about now. Wake up, the dawn is here. Wake up, cast off all your fears. Whatever haunts your dreams, we'll leave beside these streams. Now the chorus. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. The dawn is here. All right, another verse. The past is a memory. The next thing is a mystery. From different roads we came. Somehow it's all the same. Of course, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Ooh, the dawn is here. Another verse now. This life is a storybook, and right now, if we only look, we'll see the pages turn. We'll feel our spirits burning. Oh. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. The dawn is here. Rock out. Another verse. Wake up, for now is your time. Wake up, joy is ours to find, and beauty waits to be discovered. Now, as every day stone is uncovered. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. The dawn is here. Another chorus. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up, wake up, yeah. The dawn is here. Kick it, yeah. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. The dawn is here. 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 You can't resist the hippie vibes of that song, right? It's so good, man. Come on. Okay, would you take a moment now and offer one another a sign of peace, please?
Good morning. Let's see, do we have it? We have some volume coming up. Good morning. There it is. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to 1111 at the Garden. I'm Tom McDermott. For you visitors here, I'm Tom McDermott, one of the co-leaders of this service, along with Kagan Parker, who's around here somewhere. And we're going to be talking together here in just a little bit and having a great conversation as we keep thinking about what are the stories we live by, what are the stories we tell, and today in particular, how to tell a story like Jesus. And that's going to be fun. So, a couple of things. If you're visiting, and I do notice a few visitors, thank you for being here. We're glad to have you. Hope you feel welcome here. This is an unusual service. We're in an unusual space. It's really all about critical and reflective thinking and open-mindedness and curiosity of what it means to be in the kingdom of God. And we do that in a lot of ways. But one thing that I think we all need to be reminded of is that there is a prosody. Prosody? Prosody? There is a prosody to what we do. I believe that's a poetic term that suggests there's a theme. And everything in this service, it's always who we've been, is sort of like everything about what we do on a particular Sunday morning is about a thread that runs through. And so hopefully there's some place that you find connected there. Thank you all for being online watching us. We've had increasingly larger and larger groups watching us online as well. Glad to have you all here. You can all scan your code. You can get online and sign online as well. There's a place to scan. There's a place to do an offering if you want to do that. And we'll have an offering here in just a minute. A couple other things. I want to thank Frank for being here. Where's Frank? There's Frank. Yeah, Frank. He's the other half of Sarah. That's weird to say it that way, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, and so when they were here this morning, I was like, normally they're here, later in the morning like you all, and so he's here first thing early this morning, and I'm just like, oh, I guess it's normal. Somebody shows up early for no reason at all. And then, of course, I find out his wife's singing, which is awesome. So glad to see that. And I want to thank Frank especially because as soon as he showed up, what does he do? But he just goes and he starts helping to set up the space. Isn't that nice? That's kind of fun. That's just kind of fun. That's kind of what we do. I just sort of believe things will happen, So not always. I've shown up here sometimes late because of teaching at 10:45. Nobody's done anything. So that's okay too. Whoever brought the pastries, the donuts and stuff, I don't know who did that. I don't know if you want to raise your hand, but thank you, Ann, thank you. You brought the cookies. Somebody else brought the donuts. Isn't that nice when that happens? So thank you all for doing that. A couple of quick things. Wine and Wishful Thinking has changed its schedule. So now you'll notice the next gathering is on the 11th, second and fourth Tuesdays. We always have great conversations there. We always have a good group that shows up. So if you have curiosities that are sparked by what you hear here or other things going on, we always have great conversation and invite you to be a part of that. So that's always second and fourth Tuesdays. I think that is everything for now. You'll see some other opportunities you can participate in there, but for now, that's enough, I think, for what we're doing. I'm going to invite Larry and Becky to come forward, and they're going to pass the plates, and we're going to have some music as we get our hearts and minds kind of prepared for our Kairos time.
You're welcome to sing along on this tune. It might be familiar to a lot of y'all. It's written by our good friend, Elizabeth Wills.
Love, hear my voice through the silence and the noise. Peace is welcome in, it's welcome in. Love, fill my heart, pull me close where I'm apart. Peace is welcome in, it's welcome in. Love, be my guide, even as I close my eyes. Love, be here now, be here now. Love, sing my words so that everyone is heard. Love, be here now, be here now. Love is all around, it's all around.
Thank you, girls. Wow, love the harmony. Lovely job. Again, let me add my welcome to each of you. My name is George Sutton. I'm here to do the Kairos moment. Kairos is a very special time. Biblically, I guess it could be translated God's time. It's not... Well, it's the phrase in the Bible is in the fullness of time. In other words, when it's supposed to happen. And this week I've been reading in Philippians chapter 4. And if you're familiar with that, Paul is writing to the church and telling them to rejoice. And yet he himself is going through great difficulty. But he tells the church to rejoice, have joy. Now, how can you do that? In Philippians chapter 4, he says, the Lord is at hand. We might retranslate that. The Holy is at hand. And then he says, unusual phrase, I hope you can hold on to it. Be not anxious about anything. What makes you anxious? Are you anxious right now? What makes you anxious? Get in touch with that. Because the Holy is at hand. And he goes on down. The Elizabeth Wills song is perfect to set this up because it says, peace be here now. And that's the way Paul ends that particular pericope. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. So I want us to take just a few moments. We're going to take a few breaths. I'd like for us to get in touch with what makes me anxious. Could be anything. But get in touch with that and know that the Holy is at hand, here, now, in this moment, to bring peace into your life, into your situation. So if you're comfortable, close your eyes. You may want to open your hand. You may want to relax your body as you can. Take a few deep breaths. What is it that makes you anxious? Know that peace is available now, in this moment. Not that it changes the situation, but that it changes you. And you may have peace. Which surpasses our understanding. Amen.
Thank you, George, for that. Today we have a very appropriate scripture. It's from Matthew chapter 13, verses 10 through 17. The disciples came up and asked, "Why do you tell stories?" He replied, "You've been given insight into God's kingdom. You know how it works. Not everybody has this gift, this insight. It hasn't been given to them. Whenever someone has a ready heart for this, the insights and understandings flow freely. But if there is no readiness, any trace of receptivity soon disappears. That's why I tell stories, to create readiness, to nudge the people toward a welcome awakening. In their present state, they can stare till doomsday and not see it, listen till they're blue in the face and not get it. I don't want Isaiah's forecast repeated all over again. Your ears are open, but you don't hear a thing. Your eyes are awake, but you don't see a thing. The people are stupid. They stick their fingers in their ears so they won't have to listen. They screw their eyes shut so they won't have to look, so they won't have to deal with me face to face and let me heal them. But you have God-blessed eyes, eyes that see, and God-blessed ears, ears that hear. A lot of people, prophets and humble believers among them, would have given anything to see what you are seeing, to hear what you are hearing, but never had the chance.
Thank you, Jay. That was really good reading. That was very enjoyable. It's always nice when you know people read and different people are reading and you get to hear something from somebody else's voice. Such a treat.
I was
Yeah.
actually just thinking the same
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I think when you said they stick their fingers in their ears so they won't have to listen, I was like, wow, that's a really vivid image. That's like that Nana Boo Boo type energy. It made me giggle. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And thank you, George. You said something that stuck with me as well, that the peace that we have the invitation and access to doesn't change the situation, but it changes us. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to take that one with me this week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great thing to take with us this week. We find ourselves anxious, deep breaths. Deep breaths.
Deep
Breathe
breath.
in the peace. Maybe share it.
I really loved this passage, and we're going to play a little bit off of this passage today. I think you mentioned earlier that we're going to just be telling stories and talking about, how our stories have been impacted, as well as stories that cause an impact. That stories like how Jesus would tell them. Did you guys ever read a Jesus story when you were younger, and it was just kind of like, what is happening here? And I'm a little confused.
You all read a story like now older and still wonder what's happening
was
here?
it still
Yeah.
now? I think it was always really interesting. The parables that were told were really meant to make you stop and think. And I think we've been having conversations about how can we continue to carry stories that make us stop and think, and that cause a pivot of direction. So that's what we'll be kind of talking about today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can we have such fun conversations when we talk about this ahead of time. I mean, it's really this is what you all should be doing. We should just have a bunch of chairs in our office, and then you just kind of gather there, and then it's much more casual. It's not this feeling. And to be honest, sometimes these conversations go for an hour and a half. And
I think we talked for 2 hours
2
on
hours.
Saturday.
And it's always interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we always come up with these really interesting insights.
That's great.
And so we're going to try to do that in 20 minutes, though. We'll see what happens. So I'll start with what we were thinking. Last week we ended with this idea of taking a look at how the myths that sort of guide us, the sort of universal archetypal kind of myths that underlie how we act and what we think. And oftentimes these are unconscious. We just assume that the way we're being, the way society operates, the way our culture operates, that this is the right way. And so we have all of these sort of mythic realities. And when we say myth, we're not saying that this is that this is fake or that it's a fairy tale. It's really something incredibly foundational that we've embodied and we live out of. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It also means we're not always aware of the myths we are living by.
Right.
And so we talked about progress, the myth of progress, the myth of individualism, the myth of capitalism, the myth of prosperity. All of these things are basically sort of blueprints, narrative blueprints that we've fallen in line with. And the interesting thing about that then is when we get to our personal stories, we tend to judge ourselves based on those myths.
Yeah.
Are we successful? Are we keeping up with our neighbors? Are we doing as well as so-and-so did? Did we fail some places? We carry all these mythic sort of personal stories that become kind of baggages related to the myths that we're living by.
Yeah.
And so the question then is, are we really aware that we are living by this myth? Is it helpful? Is it helpful to the bigger picture? Is that a part of the problem of the bigger picture? But then what you see with Jesus is that, like in this text, It's this idea that sometimes stories are meant to wake us up,
Yeah.
or Jesus' actions were meant to wake up the people around him because he was hanging with the wrong people. He was including the wrong people, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
He was counterintuitive in a lot of the stuff he did. So I thought we could tell stories that were sort of like counterintuitive encounters in our own lives, and at moments where we kind of woke up, or where we can look back and go, oh, that was the beginning of sort of waking up to where we are now. So I thought I would share first, and then Kagan's going to share. We may have some questions for each other, and then if we have time, we get to the end, I would like to sort of give you an example of how you might tell a story like Jesus told. Okay, so for me, when I was growing up, I grew up in a dysfunctional family and divorce and alcoholism and stuff, and abuse and that kind of reality. So when I got into high school, I was looking for groups to affiliate with because I lived with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, and I wanted to find a group of friends. And I ended up getting with a Baptist group, eventually the Bible Church in the Fort Worth area, and then eventually when I went to the University of Texas, where my wife was going also, I got involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Some of you might know InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. It was a very sort of fairly rigid structural identity oriented around very literal and kind of rigid orientation of the Bible. And I had been the president of my Bible church youth group, so I fit right in. And when I joined it, I was already having fun, being in line to sort of participate in the leadership council, and then eventually moved from sort of Bible study leader to vice president of the chapter. And so I was a part of this large group of, say, maybe 100 students that was meeting off the campus of UT. And so I was doing Bible studies. Now, Linda was also doing Bible studies, but here was the thing. We both were very active in something called Bill Gothard seminars. Some of you might even know what Bill Gothard seminars were, but it's very much a structured reality around how men should be and how women should be. So very role identified. It was very rigid in terms of how you should behave. Women were helpers, men were the leaders, etc. So I was the Bible study leader. Linda was a helper. Not in my Bible study. She was in another Bible study, and she was a helper. And then she had a guy who was the lead teacher. I had a young woman who was my helper. Here's the problem, though. As we got to teaching, my helper was smarter than me. My helper was a better teacher than me. In fact, she reminded me a lot of Linda, who was a very logical and structured-oriented person, progressive, but very, very logical. And the guy that was leading her Bible study he was gone one week during the Bible study, and she stepped in to substitute, and they all were like, oh, so this is what a Bible study could be like in her Bible study. Now, this was a problem. We didn't know it was a problem because it felt natural. We were just doing what felt natural. I don't know why it never registered with me that women are not supposed to do something and men are supposed to do something and not supposed to do. I mean, it never really registered that rigidly.
Yeah.
But now when the community started raising up these questions, it began to throw kind of take out a couple of the cornerstones to how I understood things as a young adult. And it already began to throw questions into it. And the fact was that we ended up sharing leadership in both of our Bible studies, with oftentimes our female partners taking over the leadership more and having more conversational stuff happen as well. And it was just kind of a learning experience for each of our duets, so to speak. But that continued to threaten. And I found myself outside of the leadership council. And then eventually we found ourselves, our Bible studies were discontinued the next semester, and they were reoriented into another couple of Bible studies.
Oh, wow.
And we weren't invited to teach. And little by little, we just began to realize we were being kind of ostracized because we had challenged, unwittingly, this system. And while that was going on, I was taking a philosophy class, and Linda and I were taking a Bible class from a United Church of Christ, a congregational minister who was a PhD in Bible, taught off campus at the church, at his church, or that church there. And I thought, he's got it all wrong. I mean, he literally didn't understand the Bible as a literal word of God. He didn't understand events as historical, scientific, literal events. Of course, Linda was like, well, I don't either. And I was like, okay. So she was finding the freedom to be more expressive in this class and really finding things open up for her. She one day was walking down the West Campus, and she saw that same professor sitting at an LGBTQ advocacy table on the West Lawn, or the West Campus. That was basically where all of the student groups would gather. And so he was sitting there with this group. And Linda said, she heard a voice in her head said, you've really been, I'm going to paraphrase for her, but it said, you've really been too narrow-minded about this. You really haven't seen this is where I am.
Wow.
That's what she said she heard in her own mind. Yeah. And I found that difficult, of course, because of my Bible church background. But then I took his class, and I remember studying philosophy at the same time and talking about logic and reason. And in his class, I was defending the resurrection. And I don't want to disparage wherever you are, what you're thinking, but I was so adamant about proving the literal physicality of this resurrection. And I wrote this extensive paper, and all he did was he put on there, he gave me a C. And then he said, have you ever thought of using some other source besides the Bible to make your proof?
Oh, wow.
And I thought, I had never thought of using anything other than the Bible to make my proof. And, we call that logical fallacy or circular reasoning, which we see happening all the time. Right. But then he put at the very back later on, when I talked with him later on, he said, there's something about using the source of what you're trying to prove that it's actually, true, that doesn't really give it validity. You need to move outside that box to see and to test something. So that was the beginning of how things began to open up for me. Wow. And it just, all of those things coming together at the same time began to invite me to see something else.
That's quite a bit to happen all in one breath. That kind of,
it happened over a period of about 3 months, but yeah.
No, that's a lot. 3 months at this point, I've learned goes by faster than I
Well, and we
imagined.
decided to go to another church because the Bible church the local Bible church group in the university was no longer receiving us well. And so we started visiting a Presbyterian church where, in fact, it had a woman minister. Now, this was back in the 70s. I know you think I'm talking about the 90s because I don't look like I'm over 35, but it was actually in the late 70s and early 80s, and this woman minister was there, and we were just like, okay, we're settling into this new reality.
Yeah.
And so, all of it was kind of coming together at the same time.
I really love what you said about, like, what felt natural. It felt like you were kind of going against what felt natural. If they were better teachers, if she was smarter than you, if wouldn't it just be normal to do this? But culture and religion and tradition is telling me to do something else. I can only imagine what kind of moment you had of just kind of almost rocking back and forth of wait, huh? This is weird, and you're telling me one thing, but I'm feeling truly another thing. But what do I do with that? So I wish I could transport myself back into your brain at that moment just to kind of see how you even made it past that. Because I think sometimes, like you said, we create stories that keep us from even walking through the door that's been opened, that we start blaming ourselves, and there's all this guilt and shame associated. But you're here today, so you kept going, which is fascinating. Yeah, it's the thread. When you start looking back at the threads, you see the thread that's kind of running through this, the narrative thread, and you see where things were challenging it. And a lot of times, I recognize I'm getting in my own way of experiencing what is sacred and inviting. And this idea, I think one of the themes we'll talk about at the end is this idea of being invitational versus defensive, and how we interpret stories and how we tell stories. And that was always a challenge for me, is that I found myself either leaning towards being defensive, but I found much more possible if I was trying to be invitational. So I think that played a big part. And I grew up in this dysfunctional reality, so it was interesting. Once I started seeing systemic structures, especially dysfunctional ones, it reminded me of home. So I could actually sort of go, oh, I see, this is kind of a reality. Oh, wow. This happens in reality as well as in our individual homes. So that helped. That's fascinating. But you shared with me, I think, an interesting story that I think we could all really appreciate. Well, speaking of systemic structures. Yeah. So the story I wanted to share was like when you have that TV moment where like the world kind of bursts open and there's like stars and explosions like that. I had one of those real life moments. I grew up here in Colleyville, Texas, which is of course a predominantly white area. It's very normal. Now what's not normal is being a brown kid in that reality, because what I was being taught in church and in school was not echoed in how I was being treated. I knew everybody was, a holy child of God. I knew we were all working towards this goal of the kingdom, but like, and we're supposed to support the least of these, but that actively did not align with the treatment I was receiving in my environment. Does that make sense? So like I'm experiencing like real life like switching. So I remember finding diaries from when I was little of like, I feel like I come home and I take off a mask. Like who I am outside this house is not who I am allowed to be. I can't be that same person. It wouldn't allow me to do that. It felt unsafe. And this continued on because I continued to be in predominantly white spaces, which is completely fine. There's no shame on that at all. I loved my upbringing. I had a phenomenal time, but it did shape me in a certain way that I didn't even know I was participating in this story of being the whitewashed black girl. White on the inside, but black on the outside. They called me Oreo Cakester. It was a horrendous experience as a high schooler. And it caused a lot of identity crisis. And I began to believe that was who I was, that I wasn't black. I really was a white person stuck in a black person's body. Like it really caused an immense amount of strife as it was to growing up and trying to become a person. I was probably like 16 at the time. So fast forward like maybe 8 years later, and I had moved to Maryland at this point. I'm no longer in predominantly white spaces. I'm the minority in most spaces, and that's not, as a black person, a minority in a predominantly African space, a predominantly, Palestinian space. Like I'm not special anymore, and that was cool. And it allowed me to kind of step out of that story a little bit. But the real like cartoon moment was the day I started my critical race theory degree, and I realized that the stress and the pressure that I was feeling, the social anxiety that I had gained, because I felt like people were watching me. I felt like people were judging me. I felt eyes on me all the time. I had become socially anxious. And the very first day of class, he was like, things are not as they appear.
Wow.
Maybe things are not as they appear. And we started breaking down structures, and I learned that I was not crazy. I wasn't crazy. I was actually experiencing the pressure that I thought I was feeling. I was actually experiencing that. That otherness, it wasn't fake. It wasn't in my head. That was very real, and it felt as if someone had like released me from this hold that I didn't even know that I was in. I had no clue. And it then gave me the freedom to then pick what story I wanted to participate in. I didn't have to be the awkward black girl. I could just be myself. I didn't have to be the token black girl. I could just be myself and be interested in the things that I wanted to be interested in and go do the things that I wanted to do. But now I was aware of the systems at play that were making me feel crazy. It was like being gaslit every day. Like it actually was. Yeah. And to have someone say like, no, you're not insane. You're not crazy. People are watching you closer because African Americans are expected to fail. They're waiting for it. You are being looked to perform at higher levels than everybody else because you shouldn't be in this space in the first place. Like
so when you're in a predominantly white environment, you're being looked at.
Yep.
When you're in a predominantly black environment, you're being looked at.
I'm being looked
for
at.
different reasons, but yeah. Wow.
So I had really self-identified as the girl who did not belong. And that was something I dug my heels into. I'm different. No one else is like me. No one knows my experience. I don't know what I'm gonna do. There's no one else in the world like me. And that caused isolation, that caused self-hatred, that caused anxiety. And it also stopped me from participating in community like I get to do today. And I can't imagine if I had stayed in that place, I truly would not be here today because I wouldn't have allowed myself to be seen in this way.
Yeah.
Wasn't comfortable enough.
Yeah.
So it really just, I changed like my whole person.
I kind of need to sit with that. What you just said, I kind of need to sit with that a little bit. That's amazing. Yeah, that's really. And one of the things that we talked about is with such a change, you know, and the internal narratives you're challenging or you're feeling challenged by. You know, we talked about how do you come back into a reality without the defensiveness?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah, we touched on that because now that I know that what I was experiencing was real, I got mad. I got really mad because I had been terribly mistreated, like terribly mishandled. But then like the anger didn't feel good for me. And like, what's it doing to anybody else? Like I'm not gonna pour that out into the rest of the world. That doesn't feel fair either, and it's hurting me to be angry. So what can I do then? And I mean, that's that part of that we talked about as well, was I had decided to participate in a different story.
Yeah.
I wanted freedom, and hatred and freedom do not go together at all. So I chose freedom. I chose freedom. I chose love.
What do you mean
acceptance.
by freedom?
Freedom to, oh gosh, freedom just to be. Like I get there's racism, I get there's sexism, I get there's, you know, homophobia, I understand all those things, but like I personally can choose to just be. Even I can be aware of these things and see them and hold space for them, but they don't have to impact how I move and how I breathe and how I choose to live my life. I can be free.
Have you found it harder to find a narrative path that doesn't fall into cancel culture?
Yeah.
Right? Because, I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of how we orient ourselves right now. We're in this bounce back and forth. He said, she said, cancel culture, and it's like, how do you transcend? Have you found a way to be free in that?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, kinda. That's an ongoing situation, really, because I don't like cancel culture. I think if we don't like something, shutting it down is definitely not the answer. There's something there. There's something beautiful. A part of me is there. There's a strand there. There's something there. So canceling it makes no sense. I think I just continue to move with curiosity is the answer. Curiosity and love. Like I say I love it before I feel that I love it, if that makes any sense. Like going into a space that feels tense or strange, I'm like, I love it here. Happy to be here. Even if I don't feel that way, because I can lead with that intention to love. I can lead with that intention to be curious. Even if I'm not curious, I can say, that's interesting, I am curious, even if I don't feel that way. But you're like actively going against this really strong pull all the time. It's like you're swimming upstream. So you kind of have to put feeling aside and put desire and choice first. I choose to be this way. I desire to live this way. I desire to move this way. And that's the only thing I've figured out thus far. But
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll learn more. Hopefully we'll have more tools.
One of the things that I've valued about this space and this community is this, and hopefully we do this fairly regularly. I don't know that we always do it as intentionally, but that this space is more of a space for creatively engaging in that place of ambiguity, as opposed to trying to define one way or the other.
Yeah.
So that's why we were talking yesterday afternoon about this idea of being invitational as opposed to defensive.
Right.
Is like, what's the moment inviting if we have this? I remember in seminary, okay, so years later, I'm graduated now, we've been in the Presbyterian Church, I decided I'm going to go into seminary. I feel called to seminary to be a Christian counselor, which I learned later on, that's not who I am, but in a lot of different ways. But one of the things we took a class that was called the Social Construction of Reality. We took that in seminary, and the teacher, Dick Hayne, had us, when we first got in the class of 30 people, he had all of the women sit in the front in a circle, and all of the men sit in the back. And he just did that. He just structured it that way. And for me, it was like, all right, this is interesting. And for Linda, Linda actually, she took a different class, but she had him for the same kind of class. But the next week, 4 of the guys had dropped out.
Oh, wow.
And for the next 6 weeks or so, I guess 12 weeks for the class, the challenge was always like men spoke last.
Wow.
And it was just a systemic restructure. I know, I'm looking at some women going like, yeah. Here's the interesting thing. If you're really thinking outside the box, you're realizing that it's not just a reality, but it's also incredibly generational reality.
Yeah.
So that when we think about some of these experiences in our relationship with where men talk more than the women in groups and stuff like that, we're often thinking in terms of our own personal experiences historically, not necessarily reality, right? Where we are in the moment. So we're constantly have to reframe our stories. Yeah. And that's where we get stuck is not this, we find ourselves being defensive because we're living out of a historical tale. Mm. We're living out of a story of our own personal historical experience, right, as opposed to what is the story of creative possibility? What is the story of God's redemptive possibilities inviting right now? Right. So that's where we get to be more invitational than defensive. But it changed my understanding of things. I mean, systemically, it was a systemic effort. The reason why I wanted to bring that up is because a lot of the stories Jesus told were intentional in flipping things. They were meant to turn things upside down. We have this wonderful quote from Rumi about, did we put it in this one? I don't know that we put it in this one. I don't think we did. But it was, the love wants to turn you upside down and shake all the nonsense out. One of my favorite quotes of Rumi's.
I love that.
Yeah. It's this, and so Jesus told stories that were intended to shake all the nonsense out, but they often weren't understood. Yeah. And he would, because as he said, just didn't have the ears to hear at that moment.
Right, right. Well, I think about that. Like if we had been different people even in our own stories and our own experiences, because that's what we're sharing. There wasn't necessarily a story that broke it open. There wasn't an experience that broke it open. But if we hadn't been in a space that was just right enough to accept it, just right enough to be able to see it and experience it, because there's invitations everywhere, but do we always see them? No. And do we always accept them? No. And are we always capable of even recognizing that to be what's happening versus are we freaking out and shutting down and getting defensive? Mm-hmm. There's this space that you deserve to be in that allows you to just breathe into what's next. And like, it's really cool to know that if we have this experience, that means maybe this is like a universal human experience, that we all can be in a space that we can breathe into what's next.
Yeah. When I was thinking about stories like Jesus told and that I haven't been told in my life that have turned things upside down, well, one of them was told by a friend of mine, Elizabeth Ellis. Some of you all remember Elizabeth Ellis, who was a storyteller, still around, storytelling. Much older now, but still doing some great storytelling. And she came and talked and told stories once or twice to 1111 back in the day. One of the stories she told me once when we were dealing with drug abuse in our family and dealing with some substance abuse in our family and struggling with trying to understand that. And she said, she said, I have a friend who told me this story when I was dealing with my own son, she said, and his addiction. She said, the story went like this. I knew a man who lived in hell, but he could never leave because he knew the streets too well. And then over the years, Elizabeth and I have told this story back and forth to each other. And she says, how much do you think that story is really about addiction? And how much do you think it's just about ignorance? Yeah. And not seeing the bigger picture. And when I shared it with you, what did I say? I said, so how do we think about reframing that? And what did you say?
Oh gosh, what did I say?
Oh, I remember.
Go ahead.
You said, let's call hell heaven.
Yeah. Yeah, like how do you break out of that whole knowing all the streets? Rename it. Let's call hell. Let's call it heaven. Well, and I like this.
Have you all seen the series The Good Place?
Oh yeah, who's seen The Good Place on Netflix?
That's literally what it does. It literally reframes the reality.
It's fun. It's really fun. The story kind of made me chuckle because when I moved back to Texas, I was kind of like, darn, I escaped for a second. Now I'm back. Like, dang it. And there was something a little eerie about knowing the area, knowing all the streets, but it has changed. And it's become something completely different because I've allowed it to become something different. The street names haven't changed. Yeah. But now I'm looking for something else. I'm not just reading the street signs. I'm looking for the people. I'm looking for the space. I'm enjoying a different atmosphere. So I don't know. It just kind of made me think differently about my own experience of knowing all the street names of like, yeah, there is something strange about being in a place where you know everything and that you're comfortable and there's a routine and you can't get out. But reframing it and coming back to it, that's a whole different experience in itself.
It's not as easy. It's not as familiar it's not as simple a path in terms of how we reframe stories that we hear, because we're very much oriented around binary stories right now. We're all getting the same text messages from friends who are sending us this about that party or this party or that or a president or reactions to that. I mean, we're seeing all these kinds of very binary reactions.
Yeah.
And the temptation to try to, it's really hard to find an invitational story.
It is.
But that's what I think is what Jesus did. I think Jesus told stories that were invitational rather than defensive.
I thought of one, if it's okay to share.
Yeah, we probably should get the band to start coming this way, but
y'all want to wiggle.
Okay.
Did anybody read The Lottery in school? Is anybody familiar with The Lottery, the story? Okay, a little bit. This was like a Jesus story for me. It felt like it was doing exactly what Jesus would have wanted with the seed it planted. So The Lottery is about this town in the middle of nowhere in some city in some state. And it's a really small town, and they're very communal, and they're farmers. So they have this practice that they do, and every year, when the crops get bad, or when there's a drought or something, they have something called the lottery, where everyone in town draws a piece of paper, and I can't remember if it was like a dot or something. Do you remember, Avenel? Like there was something on the paper. If you got the dot on the paper, you won the lottery, which sounds cool. It's not. If you win the lottery, you are then sacrificed. They're stoned to death, and the whole town participates. Children, mothers, fathers, you're stoned and killed in pursuit of making sure the crops grow. And the story basically follows this one individual who's like, this seems reckless. Does anybody know why we're doing this? Can anybody tell me? And they're like, oh, it's to keep us all alive. It's to keep us safe. It's to keep us here. And there's just this persistent questioning of like, are y'all sure we should be murdering somebody? Are y'all sure we should be, the children are here. Like, are you sure we should be doing this? And unfortunately, the book ends with someone dying. They stone them in public, and it's a fascinating display, but that story was like one of, and they leave it like that. That's how the book ends, and it's terrible. But it leaves you kind of hanging on that. Why do we do what we do? Is tradition always right?
Why do we do these dysfunctional, systemic ways of being?
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe we can question things in pursuit of doing something different. And I loved that, and it's stuck with me.
So if we're not upended physically or emotionally because of some event, then the only way we might find change is if we begin to see life as more invitational for ways we can be creative instead of responding out of our familiar narrative patterns.
I like
Maybe that's it. Are we being invitational in this moment? Are we being defensive in this moment? What are we defending if we're defending it? And then what's the invitation even behind that? You know, if the kingdom is about interconnectedness. Yeah. All right.
That's your homework.
That's it. Yeah. I guess I should end if you have ears to hear. Or no, those who have ears to hear. I don't know. Anyway, yeah.
Thanks, guys.
You could say that you stand apart, put a fence around your yard. You can build a tall rampart, guarded with a gun. You can dig yourself a moat, burn the bridge and burn the boat. It won't matter that much, you know, 'cause all the world is one. All the world is one. You can march in a big parade every Independence Day. You can raise up your own flag and sing your own anthem. It'll ring out in the air with all the other anthems there, till the winds of the world declare all the world is one. All the world is one. Go and ask the Buddha when he standing up on the moon, staring at that pearl of blue. Ask an atom in the breath you take, ask the water by the riverbank, ask a strand of DNA, it's written in your blood. One light running in your veins, one light from one big bang. You can try and separate, but all the world is one. All the world is one. Go and ask the Buddha when he's sitting under the tree. Ask Annie Dillard when she's a barn-seeker Cree. Ask Alan Shepard when he's standing up on the moon, staring at that pearl of blue. You can take an outbound train, try and make a getaway. You can ride off like John Wayne into the setting sun. But earthlings don't leave town, they just go round and round until we figure out all the world is one. All the world is one. All the world is one. Oh. All the world is one. Now. Yeah. That's a good one.
Let's all stand for a benediction. This idea, all the world is one, is a difficult story to tell. It's a difficult one to find a thread in and to find invitational ways of telling that story. But maybe this is one way to remind ourselves that it's not about us. It's not about you or me individually. It's about the whole thing. We are pieces of the whole thing. And when we start to recognize we're pieces of this possibility of love, this possibility of interconnectedness, this possibility of wholeness, then that's a different story altogether that we can tell. So we don't go from this place in peace. We go in pieces. Old ideas get upended. New ideas are always invitationally being mended. And though the whole place around us feels like it's unraveling, we are traveling together. And we are traveling together in pieces so that we might discover our world and share that with others. So go in pieces.